Empire on edge. Unknown vessel detected. No one knew where it came from, only that nothing could catch. The border station of Velkar Reach floated in silence at the edge of the Thren Ascendancy, a great ring of metal and light spinning slowly against the dark. For 900 years, the Ascendancy had ruled this part of the galaxy without real challenge. Its fleets were the largest anyone had ever built. Its sensors could read the heat of a single engine from 3 light-years away. Its people, the Thren, were tall, pale-skinned, and proud, and they had grown used to being unquestioned masters of everything they could see. Commander Vas Ilarion did not feel proud that night. He felt tired. He had commanded Velkar Reach for 6 years, and in that time nothing had ever truly gone wrong. Ships came, ships went, cargo was checked, and the border stayed quiet. It was the kind of post you gave to an officer who was steady but not exciting. Vas was fine with that. He liked steady. At the sensor deck, a young officer named Peya sat with her eyes fixed on her screen. She had been on duty for 4 hours and nothing interesting had happened. Then, at exactly 2:12 station time, something did. A single blip appeared on the long-range scanner. It was faint, barely more than a shadow of a reading, sitting at the very edge of detection range. Peya frowned and leaned closer. "Sir," she said, "I have a contact." Vas walked over, more out of habit than concern. "Trade ship, smuggler." "I don't know yet, it's far out, but sir, look at this." She pointed at the readout. "It's not on any registered flight path. It's not broadcasting an ID beacon. And it's moving." "Moving how fast?" Peya's frown deepened. "That's the strange part. I can't get a clean speed reading. The numbers keep changing every time I check." Vas leaned over her shoulder and studied the screen himself. The blip sat steady for a moment, then jumped position, then sat steady again. It was not smooth motion, not like any drive system he knew. It was almost as if the ship were skipping across space rather than flying through it. "Run a deep scan," Vas said. "I want to know what we're looking at." The deep scan took almost a full minute, which was unusual. Thren's sensor systems were fast. A minute felt like a lifetime. When the results came back, Peya's face went pale. "Sir, the scan can't lock onto a hull shape. It's like the ship keeps changing size and shape every time the scanner pulses. That shouldn't be possible." "Sensor error," Vas said, though he did not fully believe it. "Recalibrate and try again." She did. The result was the same. Word moved quickly after that. Within the hour, every officer on duty at Velkar Reach had heard about the contact at the edge of the sensor range that the station's best equipment could not properly read. By morning station time, the report had been sent up the chain, first to Sector Command, then further to the offices of High Marshal Calith Droz himself in the capital system of Threnville. High Marshal Droz was not a man who enjoyed surprises. He was old by Thren standards, silver-eyed and sharp-tongued, and he had spent his whole life making sure the Ascendancy never had to be surprised by anything. He read the report twice before speaking. "An object at the border that our scanners cannot properly measure," he said slowly, as if tasting the words, "and it moves in a way our systems cannot track cleanly." "Yes, Marshal," said his aide, a nervous young officer named Tallies. "Velkar Reach lost the contact completely 6 hours after first detection. It simply vanished from all sensors." Vanished or moved beyond range. The station commander believes it moved beyond range, but sir, the speed required to do that in the time given would be far beyond anything in our records. Beyond anything we believe is possible. Droz set the report down on his desk and looked out the window of his office, out at the busy traffic of ships moving between the towers of the capital. For 900 years, the Ascendancy had never once faced a true unknown. Every species they had met, every ship they had ever tracked, fit within numbers they understood. This did not fit. "Send a patrol wing to Velkar Reach," he said, quietly. "I do not want this becoming a story people tell in taverns. Find this ship. identify it, and if it belongs to someone, find out who. Yes, Marshal. Far beyond the edge of the Ascendancy's charted space, in a region the Thren map simply labeled as unknown, a small ship moved through the dark. It was nothing like the great warships of the Ascendancy. It was barely larger than a shuttle, lean and narrow, its hull a dull gray that did not shine even in starlight. On the side, in faded letters that no Thren eye had yet read, were the words "The Restless." Inside, in a cockpit lit by soft blue light, sat a woman named Mara Calloway. She was not old, not young, somewhere in the years where a person has learned enough to be careful but not enough to be tired. Her hair was cut short and practical. Her eyes moved constantly between three screens, checking numbers, checking her ship systems, checking the emptiness around her for anything that might be a threat. "Talk to me, Ruth," she said quietly. The ship's onboard system, a calm and slightly dry voice, answered from a speaker near her ear. "Sensor sweep from the station complete. They caught us for about 6 seconds before I dropped the drive signature. Nothing to worry about." 6 seconds is 6 seconds too many. "Their equipment is very good, Captain. Better than most of what we've mapped so far. I recommend we log this system as high priority and move on before they send anyone to look closer." Mara nodded slowly. She had been doing this work for 3 years now, ever since the Frontier Fleet back home had asked for volunteers willing to fly alone, far past any support, into the territory of empires that did not know Earth existed. It was not glamorous work. There were no medals for it, no parades. It was quiet, careful, dangerous work, mapping the borders of powerful strangers so that humanity would never again be caught by surprise the way it once nearly had been, long ago, in the earliest days of first contact with another hostile species. The Restless was not built to fight. It could not fight. A single warship from almost any empire they had mapped could destroy it in a heartbeat if it ever got close enough to fire. What the Restless had instead was speed, and more than speed, a kind of movement that no other species had yet figured out. Human engineers, working in secret for a decade, had built a drive that did not simply push a ship faster through space. It folded the space just slightly around the ship, over and over in fast, small jumps that looked, to any outside sensor, like nothing they had ever recorded. It was not truly teleportation. It was closer to skipping a stone across still water, each skip covering a short distance almost instantly, faster than most enemy targeting systems could react. It made the Restless almost impossible to hit. It also made the Restless almost impossible to properly scan, because its outer hull carried a layer of material that scattered and confused most sensor pulses, making its size and shape hard to pin down. Mara had grown fond of calling it the ghost trick. She was proud of the ship, proud of the engineers back home who had built it, and proud, quietly, of the fact that in 3 years of scouting some of the most powerful and dangerous empires in this part of the galaxy, no one had ever managed to catch her. But she was also careful. Careful people lived longer than proud ones. "Put together the report," she said. "Send it back the long way, through the relay buoys. I want Fleet Command to know there's an empire out here bigger than anything we've mapped so far, big enough to matter." "Already compiling it, Captain," Ruth said. For what it's worth, their border station reacted fast, faster than the last 3 empires we scouted. Someone over there is paying attention. Mara looked out through the front viewport at the distant lights of what she now knew was called, according to the scraps of communication she had picked up, the Thren Ascendancy. It looked peaceful from here, calm, but she had learned long ago that calm empires were often the ones with the sharpest teeth, simply because they had never needed to use them. "Let them pay attention," she said. "Just make sure they never actually see us." Back at Velkar Reach, the patrol wing arrived 3 days later, 4 fast interceptor ships under the command of a hard-eyed officer named Beltrek Sarnos. He had been given clear orders. "Find the contact. Track it. Identify it if possible without engaging. If it proved dangerous, report back immediately and do not chase it alone. Sarnos did not think much of the mission at first. In his experience, strange sensor readings usually turned out to be equipment faults, or smugglers with cheap stealth tech trying to look more impressive than they were. He expected to find nothing and be back at his home base within the week, filing a boring report about faulty scanners. He was wrong, and he found that out on his second day at the border. His lead ship picked up the contact at long range, the same faint, flickering signature that Peya had first seen. Sarnos ordered his wing to close in slowly, cautious, spreading out to cover more space in case the target tried to run. "Contact holding position," reported his sensor officer. "It's just sitting there, Commander, not moving." "Waiting for us, maybe," Sarnos muttered. "Or it doesn't know we're here yet, close in, quiet as we can." They closed the distance carefully over the next hour, moving at a fraction of their top speed to keep their own drive signatures low. Sarnos watched the contact grow slightly clearer on his screen, though it never became a clean reading. It remained a smudge, a blur, a shape his equipment could not quite decide on. Then, at almost the exact moment his ships crossed into what should have been effective scanner range, the contact moved. It did not accelerate the way a normal ship would. There was no slow build of speed, no long burn of engines. One moment it was there, sitting still on his screen. The next moment it was simply somewhere else, nearly 40,000 kilometers away, as if it had never been in its previous position at all. "What in the stars was that?" Sarnos said, staring at his display. "Sir, I don't understand what I'm seeing," his sensor officer said. "There's no engine trail, no drive signature buildup, it just jumped." "Get me a lock now." They tried. For the next 20 minutes, Sarnos pushed his wing hard, chasing the flickering signature as it appeared and disappeared across an enormous stretch of space, never staying in one place long enough for a weapon's lock, never leaving behind the kind of engine trail his systems needed to predict its next move. It was like trying to catch smoke with your bare hands. Every time his ships got close, the contact was simply gone, and a new flicker would appear somewhere else, sometimes closer, sometimes farther, almost as if it were toying with them. Finally, after nearly an hour of fruitless chase, the signature vanished completely and did not return. Sarnos sat in his command chair, breathing hard, staring at an empty screen. He had flown for the Ascendancy for over 20 years. He had chased pirates, hunted smugglers, fought pitched battles against raiders from the Outer Rim. He had never once seen anything move like that. "Get me a direct line to Sector Command," he said quietly. "Tell them we found it, and tell them we could not catch it." The report that reached High Marshal Droz 3 days later was longer and more detailed than the first one, filled with sensor logs and flight data that Sarnos's own analysts could not fully explain. Droz read it standing at his window, his silver eyes narrowing with every page. "An object that moves without acceleration," he said to Tallies, who stood waiting nervously by the door. "An object our best interceptor wing, flown by one of our most experienced commanders, could not catch, could not scan properly, and could not identify." "Yes, Marshal." Droz was quiet for a long moment. Outside his window, the traffic of the capital moved on as it always did, ships gliding between towers in perfect, practiced order, the picture of an empire completely in control of its own space. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Droz felt a small, cold thread of doubt creep into that picture. "Assemble the Border Council," he said finally. "I want every fleet commander who has responsibility along the outer reach in that room within the week. Whatever this is, I want to understand it before it decides to stop simply watching us and starts doing something else." Tallies bowed and hurried from the room to carry out the order, leaving High Marshal Droz alone with the report, and with the growing, uncomfortable feeling that somewhere out past the edge of his empire, Something was moving that his people did not understand at all. News of the encounter did not stay quiet for long, no matter how much Droz wanted it to. Within days, whispers spread through the officer ranks at every border station along the outer reach. A ship no one could see clearly. A ship no one could catch. Some officers laughed the story off as an exaggeration, the kind of tale that grows bigger every time it is told. Others took it seriously, especially those who had served with Sarnos and trusted his word. He was not a man given to wild stories. At a smaller outpost 2 systems away from Velkar Reach, a young sensor technician named Doven heard the story from a friend over a private comm channel and could not stop thinking about it. Doven had grown up hearing stories about the founding of the Ascendancy, about how the first Thren explorers had pushed out into the dark not knowing what they would find, and how, one by one, every mystery they found had eventually been solved, measured, and understood. The idea that something out there might simply refuse to be measured unsettled him, in a way he could not quite explain to his friend. "Maybe it's nothing," his friend said. "Maybe it's just old scout drones from some species that died out centuries ago, still running on autopilot." "Drones don't dodge 4 interceptors for an hour," Doven said. "Drones don't disappear without a trace. Something is flying that ship, something smart." His friend had no answer for that, and neither, in truth, did anyone else. Back on Threnville, the capital world, the Border Council gathered 6 days later in a tall chamber near the top of the Ascendancy's central spire, a room with a domed ceiling of clear crystal that let in the soft gold light of the system's sun. 12 fleet commanders sat around a long table of dark stone, along with senior officers from Thren Intelligence and 2 representatives from the Ascendancy's Science Division. High Marshal Droz sat at the head of the table, Sarnos's full report displayed on the screen behind him. "You have all read the report," Droz began. "I will not waste time repeating it. What I want from this room today are answers, or at the very least good questions. What are we dealing with?" A heavy-set commander named Rithen Whale, who oversaw the fleets along the southern reach, spoke first. "With respect, Marshal, I think we are dealing with an exaggeration. Sensor ghosts happen. Equipment fails. Commander Sarnos is a fine officer, but even fine officers can be fooled by their own instruments." "His entire wing recorded the same data," Droz said. 4 separate sensor arrays, all reporting the same impossible movement. That is not a single equipment failure. That is either 4 failures happening in exactly the same way at exactly the same time, or it is something real. Rithen had no quick answer for that. One of the science officers, a thin, quiet woman named Ilsa Farron, raised her hand slightly before speaking, a habit she had kept since her days as a junior researcher. "Marshal, if I may, I have studied the flight data closely. The movement pattern is not random. It is not simple either. Whatever propulsion system this vessel uses, it does not accelerate in the way our ships, or any ships we have ever recorded, accelerate. There is no gradual buildup of drive energy before each jump. The ship is simply in one position, and then, an instant later, in another." "Is that possible?" Droz asked. "True instant movement?" "I do not believe it is truly instant," Ilsa said carefully. "I believe, based on the very small energy spikes we did manage to record just before each jump, that the vessel is doing something to the space immediately around itself. Compressing it, or folding it, in some way we do not yet understand, and using that fold to cover distance far faster than any normal drive could manage. If I am right, this is not a trick of stealth technology. This is an entirely different way of moving through space, one we have never encountered before, not from any species in our records." The room went quiet at that. For an empire that had spent 9 centuries believing it understood the shape of what was possible, the idea that some unknown power had found a way to move that the Ascendancy's own best scientists could not explain was more unsettling than any weapon could have been. "And the hull," Droz said, "the scanner readings that could not settle on a shape." "That is a separate mystery," Ilsa admitted. Possibly a material coating designed specifically to scatter our sensor pulses. If so, it is extremely effective, more effective than anything currently used by any species we have ever catalogued. Commander Beltrek Sarnos, who had been called to the capital to give his account in person, spoke next, his voice low and steady. "Marshal, I want to be clear about something. In my 20 years of service, I have chased raiders through asteroid fields, hunted pirate ships through nebula clouds, and fought running battles against enemies who knew every trick to avoid a lock. I have never felt what I felt chasing that ship. It was not simply fast. It felt controlled, deliberate. Whoever or whatever is flying it was not panicking. It was choosing where to go, and it was choosing not to let us catch it, without ever once firing a weapon or making a threatening move. That, to me, is the strangest part of all. It had every chance to disappear completely at the very start. Instead, it let us chase it for almost an hour before it truly vanished." "Why would it do that?" Rithen asked. "I do not know," Sarnos said. "Perhaps it was testing us. Perhaps it wanted to see how we would react, how fast we could respond, what kind of ships we would send. I cannot say for certain, but I do not think it was an accident." Droz considered this in silence for a long moment, his silver eyes moving slowly around the table, studying the faces of his commanders. Fear, in some, curiosity in others. In a few, the beginning of something closer to respect, the grudging kind that comes from watching something impossible happen right in front of you. "Then we will proceed carefully," Droz said at last. "I want increased patrols along the entire outer reach, not just Velka Reach. I want every border station equipped with the newest long-range sensor arrays we have, even if that means pulling them from other projects. I want intelligence to search every record we have, every old report, every rumor from traders and travelers for any mention of a vessel matching this description. And I want this handled quietly. The last thing this empire needs is a wave of panic over a single ship that has, so far, done nothing but observe us from a distance." "And if it returns?" Sarnos asked. Droz's expression hardened slightly. "Then we will be ready. I do not care how fast it moves or how well it hides from our scanners. Nothing outruns patience forever. Sooner or later it will make a mistake, or it will need to come closer than it wants to. When that happens, I want every commander in this room ready to act together, not scattered and surprised the way Velka Reach was." The meeting ended not long after, the commanders filing out of the tall chamber with quiet, thoughtful faces, each of them carrying the same uneasy question back to their own fleets. What was out there, at the edge of everything they had ever known, moving faster than anything they could build, watching them with patience instead of fear? None of them yet knew the answer was a single small ship, crewed by one careful, tired, determined woman from a world they had never heard of, quietly sending her reports home across the vast dark, one border at a time. 3 weeks passed after the Border Council met, and along the outer reach of the Thren Ascendancy, life slowly returned to something like normal. New sensor arrays arrived at Velka Reach and a dozen other stations, installed by tired engineers working double shifts. Patrol schedules doubled. Reports were filed, reviewed, and filed again. But the sky stayed quiet, and quiet skies have a way of making people forget how frightened they had been. Commander Vas Ilarion did not forget. He had been the first to see the strange contact, and he found himself checking the sensor logs personally every morning, even on days when nothing at all appeared. His officers noticed, and a few of them quietly worried that their commander had grown too fixed on a single event. Vas did not care what they thought. He had a feeling, the kind a careful man learns to trust, that the story was not finished. He was right. It happened on a morning shift, 26 days after the first sighting. Peya was back at her post, and it was her voice again that broke the silence of the sensor deck. "Sir, contact, same signature as before." Vas was at her side in seconds. "Position." "Closer this time, much closer. It's inside what should be effective range for our new arrays." On the screen, the same flickering, uncertain shape sat quietly at the edge of the station's detection field, closer than it had ever come before. Voss watched it for a long moment, his jaw tight. "It's not running," he said slowly. "It's just sitting there like it wants us to see it." "Should I sound the alert, sir?" Voss thought about the standing orders from High Marshal Droz. Increased patrols, full readiness, report any contact immediately, and do not engage alone. "Sound it," he said, "and get me a channel to the patrol wing on standby." Far out past the edge of the station's clean detection range, aboard the Restless, Mara Calloway sat with her arms crossed, watching her own sensors with the calm patience of someone who had done this many times before. Ruth's voice came through the speaker, quieter than usual, almost thoughtful. "They've spotted us again, Captain. Their station just went to a higher alert status. I'm reading increased power output from several ships docked there." "Good," Mara said. "Let them look." "Can I ask why we're doing this? Last time we were very careful to stay unseen after the first pass. Now we're sitting here in plain view of their sensors." Mara leaned back in her seat, studying the slow, careful movements of the Thren ships on her own display as they began to organize themselves, forming up in defensive patterns around the station. "Because I want to know how fast they learn, Ruth. Every empire is different. Some panic. Some ignore what they can't explain and hope it goes away. This one built better sensors in 3 weeks and put them on every station along this whole stretch of border. That tells me something important. That they're capable. And that they're paying attention. Fleet Command back home needs more than just a map of their borders. They need to know what kind of people we're dealing with. Careful people who learn fast and don't panic easily are worth knowing about, especially if we ever have to actually talk to them." "You think that day is coming?" Mara was quiet for a moment, watching the distant lights of Velkar Reach glimmer against the dark. "I think it's coming for somebody someday. Might as well be us who finds out what these people are like first, from a safe distance, instead of some poor colony ship stumbling into their space with no warning at all." Aboard Velkar Reach, 4 interceptor ships launched from the station's bay under the command of a young, sharp officer named Fenna Talos, who had trained under Sarnos himself, and had been eager, perhaps too eager, for the chance to prove herself against the mystery ship everyone on the outer reach had been talking about for weeks. "Approach in formation," Fenna ordered over the comm. "Widespread, minimum 30,000 kilometers between each ship. If it runs, I want it to have nowhere clean to run to." Her officers acknowledged, and the 4 ships spread out slowly, closing in on the contact from 4 different directions at once, a tactic designed specifically after studying Sarnos's failed attempt. The idea was simple. If the mystery ship could only jump in short bursts, perhaps it could be boxed in, forced into a smaller and smaller space until it had nowhere left to jump to. Mara watched the 4 ships spread out on her display and allowed herself a small, appreciative nod. "Smart. They're trying to box us in." "Should I take us out of range?" Ruth asked. "Not yet. Let's see how tight they can make the box." The Thren ships closed in with careful precision, exactly as trained, each one adjusting position to keep the gap between them small and even. It was, Mara had to admit, a much better approach than the last one. Sarnos had chased her in a straight pursuit, giving her endless open space to jump into. Fenna was trying to remove that space entirely. For nearly 20 minutes, the 4 ships tightened their formation, the open area around the Restless slowly shrinking. Mara watched the numbers carefully, running quick calculations with Ruth, checking exactly how much room the drive needed for a clean jump, how close the margin was becoming. "Captain," Ruth said, a note of genuine concern in her voice now, "the safe margin is getting thin. If they close another 10,000 kilometers, we may not have a clean jump distance left in some directions." "I see it," Mara said, her eyes narrow, focused. "Let's give them one more minute. I want to see what they do when the box is almost closed." That is not a comfortable amount of patience, Captain. Noted. The minute passed slowly. The 4 Thren ships continued closing. And Fenna's voice came through on an open, unencrypted channel, clearly hoping the mystery ship might be listening. Unknown vessel, this is Commander Fenna Talos of the Thren Ascendancy. You are inside Sovereign Patrol space. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded, or we will be forced to consider you hostile. They speak plainly, at least, Mara muttered. Ruth, translate that into something they'll understand, politely. Do you actually want me to send a reply, Captain? That would reveal a great deal about our communication systems. No, just admiring the effort. Get ready to jump, on my mark. The box had nearly closed. The open space around the Restless had shrunk from a comfortable safety margin to something uncomfortably tight, exactly as Ruth had warned. Any normal ship, caught in a formation like this, would have had no good options left. Mara smiled slightly. Mark. What happened next would be discussed and argued over in Thren officer academies for years to come. The Restless did not jump in a single direction, as it had every time before. Instead, it performed 3 small jumps in rapid succession, each one no more than a few thousand kilometers, moving in a tight, curling path that no simple straight-line prediction could have anticipated. The first jump took it directly toward the gap between 2 of Fenna's ships. The second jump, an instant later, took it past them entirely, out beyond the edge of the closing formation. The third jump put it a full 50,000 kilometers away, safely outside effective sensor range once more. On Fenna's display, the contact blinked out of the center of her carefully closed formation and reappeared, for one brief second, well outside the trap entirely, before vanishing from her sensors completely. It's gone, her sensor officer said, voice tight with disbelief. Sir, it went straight through the gap between ships 2 and 3. It knew exactly where the thinnest point in our formation was. Fenna sat in silence for a moment, staring at her now empty display, feeling something she had never quite felt before in her career. Not fear exactly. Something closer to awe mixed uncomfortably with frustration. Return to station, she said finally. Full sensor logs to be reviewed the moment we dock. I want to know exactly how it read our formation gaps that precisely. Back aboard the Restless, Mara let out a slow breath and allowed herself to relax slightly in her seat. Nicely done, Ruth. I calculated the gap based on their relative closing speeds and adjusted for the small drift in Ship 3's formation position. They were not perfectly even, Captain. Ship 3 lagged behind the others by nearly 2 seconds throughout the maneuver. Human pilots would have caught that lag eventually too. Good instincts, whoever's flying that one. Mara studied the distant, shrinking shape of Velkar Reach on her rear display. They're learning fast, Ruth. Faster than I expected. Log everything about that formation. If Fleet Command ever needs to know how careful an enemy the Ascendancy could be, this is worth remembering. The report of the second failed intercept reached High Marshal Droz within a day, and this time, there was no attempt to keep the story quiet. Word had already spread too far. Officers across a dozen stations along the outer reach now spoke openly of the ship that could not be caught, some with fear, some with a strange, reluctant respect for whatever pilot could outthink an entire formation without ever firing a single shot. Droz read Fenna's report standing once more at his window. High Marshal Calith Droz, silver eyes fixed not on the traffic below, but on some distant point past the towers, past the sky itself. It read the formation gap before we had even finished closing it, he said quietly to Tallies, who stood, as always, by the door. It found the exact weak point in a trap our best young officer designed with real skill, and it moved through that weak point with 3 separate jumps in the time it takes most ships to make one. This is not a lucky pilot, Tallies. This is a pilot, or a mind, thinking several steps ahead of us. What will you do, Marshal? Droz set the report down slowly. I will stop treating this as a border problem to be solved by border officers. Whatever this ship is, whoever built it, they have shown us patience, intelligence, and a level of skill that unsettles me more with every report. We need to understand who is out there before we decide whether to fear them, welcome them, or prepare for them. He turned from the window at last. Send word to the science division. I want Ilsa Farron given full authority to lead a proper study of this. Full resources, whatever she needs, and send a message to Fleet Admiral Korath. Tell him I want a full War Council assessment prepared, quietly, of what it would cost this empire if that ship, or whoever sent it, ever decided to stop simply watching us. Tallies paused at the door, hesitating before he spoke. Marshal, if I may ask, do you believe it is a threat? Droz considered the question carefully before answering, his gaze drifting once more toward the window, toward the edge of everything the Ascendancy had ever known. I believe, Tallies, that for 900 years, this empire has never once had to ask itself that question honestly, because we have never met anyone we could not eventually understand, catch, or overpower. That ship has now shown us twice that it can slip through our best efforts as easily as water through open fingers. Whether that makes it a threat or not, I cannot yet say, but I will not make the mistake of assuming it is harmless simply because it has not yet chosen to hurt us. Patience, Tallies, is the most dangerous weapon there is, and whoever is flying that ship has more of it than we do. Ilsa Farron received her new orders 2 days later, and she read them 3 times before she fully believed what they said. Full authority, full resources, a direct line to High Marshal Droz's office if she needed it. In all her years as a science officer, quiet and careful and often overlooked in a military-focused empire that valued fleet commanders far more than researchers, she had never been given anything close to this kind of trust. She set up her new operation in a wide research hall near the edge of the capital, filling it with every scrap of sensor data collected from both encounters, every log from Velkar Reach, every recording Sarnos and Fenna's ships had managed to capture. Her first task, she decided, was the simplest question of all. Not how the ship moved, not yet, but who could have built it. She began by ruling things out. The movement pattern did not match any known species catalogued in Ascendancy records, not the raiders of the Outer Rim, not the trade cartels of the mid-reaches, not even the handful of old, half-forgotten precursor ruins that Thren archaeologists still puzzled over from time to time. Whoever built this ship had done so recently, with technology unlike anything in 900 years of Ascendancy records. That leaves only one real possibility, she told her small team of researchers on the 3rd night, standing in front of a wall covered in star charts and sensor logs. A species we have never met before. Not raiders, not smugglers, something new. One of her junior researchers, a nervous young man named Corvin, raised a hand. New from where, though? We have mapped every system within 100 light-years of this border. There is no home world out there capable of building something like this. Then perhaps their home world is not within 100 light-years, Ilsa said. Perhaps it is much farther than that, and this ship, small as it is, was simply sent very far from home to look at us. The thought settled uncomfortably over the room. An empire capable of sending a single small ship so far past its own borders that no trace of its origin could be found nearby was not a small empire. It was, potentially, a very large one, confident enough in its scouts to let them wander for who knew how long, gathering information, without ever needing to check in close to home. If that is true, Corvin said slowly, then whoever they are, they have likely already scouted dozens of other empires before us, maybe hundreds. Maybe, Ilsa agreed, which raises an uncomfortable question. If they have been quietly watching that many powers for that long, and none of us has ever caught more than a flicker of one of their ships, what does that tell us about how careful and how patient they must be? No one in the room had a good answer for that. Meanwhile, Fleet Admiral Korath, a broad-shouldered old soldier who had spent his career commanding the Ascendancy's largest battle groups, arrived at High Marshal Droz's office the following morning to deliver his own assessment, and he did not waste time with pleasantries. "Marshal, I have run the numbers you asked for. If that ship, or whatever fleet stands behind it, ever decided to strike at us instead of simply watching, I cannot promise you we would see it coming. Our entire defense doctrine assumes we will detect an approaching force before it arrives close enough to do damage. This ship has proven, twice now, that it can sit inside our own patrol space before we notice it, and can escape a closing trap set by trained officers using a maneuver none of my tacticians have ever devised. If they have warships that move even remotely like that scout, our entire outer fleet could be rendered useless before a single battle begins." Droz listened without interrupting, his hands folded behind his back as he stared out the window, a habit that had become almost constant since the first report arrived weeks earlier. "Your recommendation, Admiral." "Two things," Korath said. "First, we accelerate research into counter-detection methods, whatever Ilsa Farron's team can offer us, however long it takes. Second, and I say this reluctantly, Marshal, I recommend we attempt communication rather than capture. If this species is even a fraction as advanced as their scout ship suggests, trying to force a fight we may not win is a foolish path. Better to know who they are before we decide whether they are friend or foe." Droz turned from the window at last, studying the old admiral's weathered face. "You surprise me, Korath. I did not expect the commander of our largest fleet to recommend restraint." "I recommend restraint precisely because I command our largest fleet, Marshal," Korath said evenly. "I have seen what happens to armies that charge confidently into a fight they do not understand. I would rather my ships never have to find out the hard way what that scout's parent fleet is truly capable of." Droz considered this for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. We will pursue both paths. Continue reinforcing the border, but hold all offensive posture. If the ship, or its makers, ever choose to make contact, I want every station along that reach ready to respond with caution, not aggression. We will not be the ones who turn a quiet mystery into a war neither side wanted." Far beyond the border, in the quiet dark between the stars, the Restless continued on its slow, careful journey deeper along the edge of the Thren Ascendancy, mapping new coordinates, recording new patrol patterns, and carrying, tucked safely in its data banks, the first real proof that this empire, unlike some the frontier fleet had scouted before, was not going to be easy to fool twice with the same trick. Mara Calloway leaned back in her pilot's seat, watching the stars slide slowly past the viewport, and allowed herself, just for a moment, to wonder what kind of person commanded a fleet clever enough to almost catch her. She hoped, someday, she might find out the honest way. A month passed, and the mystery ship did not return. The outer reach settled into a strange new normal, one where every officer stationed along the border watched their sensors a little more closely than before, and every conversation in the mess halls eventually found its way back to the ship no one could catch. Some called it a ghost. Some called it a test sent by some unknown power to probe the Ascendancy's defenses. A few of the older, more superstitious crew members even began calling it Luckbringer, half joking that any station it visited would go on to have a quiet, uneventful tour, as if the ship carried some strange blessing with it. Ilsa Farron did not believe in luck, good or bad. She believed in data, and by the end of that month, she had gathered enough of it to bring a new theory to High Marshal Droz directly. "The scattering coating on the hull," she explained, standing before Droz and a small gathering of senior officers in the same crystal dome chamber where the Border Council had first met. "We have been assuming it was designed purely to confuse our scanners. I no longer believe that is its only purpose." "Go on," Droz said. "I believe the coating also helps regulate heat. Every drive system generates waste heat, no matter how advanced. Most ships vent that heat in predictable ways, which is part of how we normally track them even when their engines are otherwise quiet. This vessel's coating appears to absorb and slowly release heat in an irregular pattern, which would explain why even our improved sensors struggle to build a clean thermal profile. It is not simply hiding its shape. It is hiding its very presence, almost entirely. Which means, asked Fleet Admiral Korath, seated near the head of the table. Which means, Ilsa said, that whoever built this ship did not design it as a weapon. A true warship needs to project power, needs to be seen and feared to be useful in most doctrines. This ship was built to never be seen at all. Every choice in its design, as far as I can tell, serves one purpose: to watch and to never be caught watching. Droz absorbed this in silence, turning the thought over carefully. A scout, then, not a soldier. That is my belief, Marshal. And if I am right, it changes what kind of threat or opportunity we are truly facing. A civilization that builds its best scouts to be invisible rather than intimidating is a civilization that values information over intimidation. That could mean many things. It could mean they are cautious by nature. It could mean they have learned, through hard experience, that being seen too early by a stronger power is dangerous. Or it could simply mean they are patient enough to prefer knowing everything about a potential rival before that rival ever knows they exist. All three of those are troubling in their own way, Korath said quietly. Yes, Ilsa agreed. But none of them, I think, points toward an immediate desire for conflict. If they wanted to strike us, Marshal, they have had ample opportunity. 2 intercept attempts, both of which put ascendancy ships within striking range of that vessel, and at no point did it fire a weapon or even seem to arm one. I believe, cautiously, that this ship's makers are not looking for a fight. I believe they are looking to understand us, much as we are trying to understand them. Droz considered this for a long moment before responding. Understanding is not the same as trust, Farron, but it is a foundation trust can be built upon, in time. Continue your work. I want a full profile of this species' likely capabilities and intentions before we take any further steps. The council broke apart not long after, and it was in the quiet hallway outside the chamber that Sarnos found Ilsa, falling into step beside her. You believe they mean us no harm, he said, not quite a question. I believe the evidence points that way. I could be wrong. You could be. Sarnos was quiet for a moment as they walked. I chased that ship for nearly an hour, Farron. I have relived that hour more times than I would like to admit. There was a moment near the end when I thought I nearly had it. A narrow gap, a chance for a weapons lock. And in that moment the ship simply moved somewhere else as easily as stepping around a puddle. It did not feel desperate. It did not feel like something running for its life. It felt. He searched for the right word. Amused. As if whoever was flying it had already known, long before I did, that it was never truly in danger. Ilsa considered this. Does that frighten you? It should, Sarnos admitted. But strangely, it does not entirely. There was something almost respectful about it. It never fired on us. It never even came close to damaging our ships, even when it easily could have during that final maneuver near Fenna's formation. If it wanted to hurt us, Farron, I do not think we would have been able to stop it. The fact that it chose not to tells me something about the character of whoever is flying it, even if I cannot yet say what that character truly is. Far beyond the border, aboard the Restless, Mara Calloway sat reviewing weeks of accumulated data with Ruth, preparing the next stage of her long, careful survey of the Ascendancy's edge. She had drifted deeper along the border since her last encounter, mapping 3 additional systems, recording patrol patterns, listening quietly to unencrypted Thren communications whenever she could catch them, slowly building a picture of an empire that was, in its own way, impressively organized. They've stopped broadcasting most of their patrol schedules in the clear, Ruth noted one evening, as Mara ate a simple meal in the ship's small galley. Someone over there realized we might have been listening in. Smart of them. Told you they learn fast, Mara chewed thoughtfully. How's the fuel situation? We have enough for another 6 weeks of careful operation, before we would need to consider heading back toward the relay buoy for resupply. I would recommend beginning that return trip within the next 10 days, given the distances involved. Mara nodded slowly, already turning the numbers over in her head, the same careful calculations she made every few weeks out here, alone, farther from home than almost anyone else in the entire Frontier fleet. It was not always an easy life. There were long stretches of silence, weeks at a time with no one to talk to but Ruth's calm, steady voice, and there was always the quiet knowledge that if something went truly wrong out here, if the Restless were ever actually caught, there would be no rescue coming. No one back home would even know for months, maybe years. But there was also this, the particular thrill of being the very first human eyes, human mind, ever to see a place, to learn something true about a civilization that had existed for centuries without a single person from Earth ever knowing it was there. Mara had grown to love that feeling more than she had ever expected to when she first volunteered for this work. "One more system before we turn back," she said finally. "There's a shipyard reading on the old scans, deep in what looks like a secondary system just past the main border line. I want to look at it before we go. If the Ascendancy is building anything new in response to us, I want Fleet Command to know about it." "That is closer to their core territory than we have gone before, Captain," Ruth said, a note of caution creeping into her voice. "Their patrol density increases significantly the closer we get to their shipyards. I would remind you that our margin for error narrows considerably in denser patrol zones." "Noted," Mara said. "We'll be careful, we're always careful." 3 days later, the Restless slipped quietly toward the system Mara had marked, a mid-sized star with 4 planets, the third of which held a sprawling shipyard complex in high orbit, lit up with the working lights of hundreds of construction vessels and drifting hull sections in various stages of completion. Mara studied the readings with growing interest, cataloging ship types, counting numbers, noting the unusually high concentration of what looked like fast, small interceptor-class vessels under construction. "They're building more ships like the ones that chased us," she murmured. "A lot more. 53 interceptor hulls currently under construction, by my count," Ruth confirmed. "That is a significant increase over typical shipyard activity, based on historical patterns we recorded before your first encounter here." "They're preparing," Mara said, "not for us specifically maybe, but for something like us, faster response times, more coverage." She allowed herself a small, tired smile. "Good. That means our reports are actually making them think, not just panic." She spent nearly 4 hours quietly recording data on the shipyard, drifting at the very edge of what she judged to be safe distance, careful never to let the Restless drift into the denser patrol lanes closer to the planet itself. It was slow, patient work, exactly the kind Fleet Command had trained her for, and exactly the kind that made this job matter, far more than any single dramatic escape ever could. It was on her way back out of the system, drifting quietly through a gap between 2 patrol routes she had carefully mapped over the previous hours, that everything went wrong. "Captain," Ruth said suddenly, her calm voice sharpening into something close to alarm. "New contact, close range, bearing directly toward our position. It was not on any of the patrol routes we mapped. I believe it has been running silent." Mara's eyes snapped to her display, and her stomach tightened as she saw the new contact, far closer than any threat had ever come before, closing fast, clearly already aware of exactly where she was. "Where did it come from?" "Unknown, Captain. It was not broadcasting any drive signature we could detect until 30 seconds ago. I believe it may have been deliberately waiting, powered down, specifically along a route it predicted we might use to exit the system." Mara's hands moved fast over her controls, adrenaline sharpening every thought. Someone, somewhere in the Ascendancy, had studied her previous escapes closely enough to guess not just where she might come from, but where she might try to leave from, and had set a trap not with a formation of chasing ships, but with patience, silence, and a single well-placed ambush. "They're learning faster than I thought," she said, half to herself, half to Ruth, already calculating her options. "Ruth, give me a clean jump line, now." "Working on it, Captain. I must inform you that our current position offers a narrower safe margin than I would prefer." The ambush ship placed itself with unusual precision. For the first time in 3 years of quiet, careful scouting, Mara Calloway felt something she had almost forgotten how to feel out here, alone at the edge of an empire that had, until this exact moment, always seemed at least one step behind her. Genuine, cold uncertainty about whether the Restless was about to get caught. The ambush ship closed fast, its drive now burning bright and clear on Mara's sensors, no longer bothering to hide now that it had revealed itself. It was larger than the interceptors that had chased her before, a heavier hull with what looked like a wider spread of weapon mounts along its sides. Whoever commanded it had clearly been given better ships and clearer orders since the last encounter. "Talk to me, Ruth. Options." "Our safest jump line takes us back deeper into the system, toward the shipyard, which I do not recommend given the patrol density there. Our second option takes us along a path that passes within 8,000 kilometers of the ambush ship's current position before clearing to open space. That is closer than I would like, but the geometry still favors us if we move immediately." "Second option, do it." The Restless folded space around itself in a short, sharp jump, closing the gap with the ambush ship for one heart-stopping instant before clearing past it entirely, exactly as Ruth had calculated. For a moment, Mara thought they were clear. Then the ambush ship fired. It was not a wild shot. Whoever was aiming had clearly anticipated the jump line, or had been quick enough to react to it, and a single energy bolt lanced out through the dark, close enough that Mara felt the ship shudder from the near miss, alarms flaring briefly across her console before falling silent again. "Damage report," she snapped. "Minor, a glancing hit against our aft shielding. Nothing critical. But Captain, that shot came very close. Closer than any hostile fire we have taken in 3 years of operation." Mara's jaw tightened as she pushed the Restless into a second jump, putting real distance between herself and the ambush ship at last, watching the enemy contact shrink steadily on her rear display. "They predicted our exit line almost exactly. That's not luck, Ruth. Someone over there has been studying every jump we've ever made, building a model of how we choose our paths." "That is a troubling possibility, Captain." "It's an impressive one too," Mara admitted, some of the tension easing from her shoulders now that the immediate danger had passed. "I don't like being shot at, but I respect good work when I see it." She guided the ship through one more precautionary jump, putting a final safe margin between herself and the system before finally letting out a long, slow breath. "Log everything about that ambush. Position, timing, the ship class, the way they predicted our path. Fleet Command needs the full picture. This empire is not just reacting to us anymore. They're actively hunting patterns in our behavior and using them against us." "Understood, Captain. For what it is worth, I am glad the margin held." "Me too, Ruth, me too." Aboard the ambush ship, a Thren officer named Ren Ashal watched his own display in tight, frustrated silence as the mystery vessel's signature faded entirely from his sensors, vanishing once more into the vast dark beyond the system. He had spent the better part of 2 weeks studying Sarnos's and Fenna's failed intercepts, building a careful model of the ship's likely escape patterns, and had positioned himself with more precision than either of his predecessors. He had come closer than anyone. He had even landed a hit. It had not been enough. "Signal Sector Command," he said quietly to his second officer. "Tell them the contact appeared again, this time deep inside our secondary shipyard perimeter, likely gathering intelligence on our construction efforts. Tell them we engaged, landed a partial hit, and it still escaped, but only after a maneuver that suggests it anticipated our ambush position almost as quickly as we set it." They'll want to know how it knew, his second officer said. I don't think it knew, Wren said slowly, replaying the encounter in his mind. I think it reacted faster than anything should be able to react. That is somehow worse. Word of the ambush and the shipyard intrusion reached High Marshal Droz within hours, and this time, the report carried a weight the earlier ones had not. The ship was no longer simply watching from a comfortable distance. It had ventured deep enough into Ascendancy territory to observe an active military shipyard, close enough that its presence there could only be deliberate, targeted intelligence gathering. They are not merely curious, Droz said to Korath and Ilsa Farron. The three of them gathered once more in his office as evening fell over the capital. They are actively assessing our military capacity, our shipbuilding, our response patterns to their previous appearances. This is not the behavior of a passive observer, Korath. This is reconnaissance. Reconnaissance ahead of what, though? Korath said. An invasion or a decision about whether to ever approach us at all. I do not know, Droz admitted, and it cost him something to say it plainly. In 900 years, the Ascendancy had rarely faced a question it could not eventually answer through strength or patience. This one resisted both. But I will not wait passively to find out. Korath, I want our shipyard security doubled quietly without drawing attention that might suggest we are frightened. Farron, continue your work, but I want your team to begin drafting something new. Not a threat assessment. A message. Ilsa blinked, caught off guard. A message, Marshal. If this ship, or its makers, are gathering information about us with such patience and skill, then somewhere, someone is making decisions based on everything they learn. I would rather that decision be informed by an honest attempt at contact than by nothing but silent observation and one lucky hit from an ambush ship. Prepare something. A broadcast on a wide range of frequencies, simple and clear, stating that the Ascendancy is aware of their presence and is open to communication should they ever wish to reveal themselves honestly. Korath frowned. Marshal, with respect, that risks revealing more weakness than strength. If they are hostile, we may simply be inviting them closer. Perhaps, Droz said. But if they are not hostile, and I am beginning to believe, cautiously, that they may not be, then continuing this pattern of chase and ambush serves no one. Sooner or later, either we catch them, or they hurt one of our people trying to avoid capture, and either outcome could turn a quiet mystery into a war neither of us intended. I would rather take the risk of speaking first. The order went out within 2 days. A simple, carefully worded message broadcast on dozens of frequencies across the entire outer reach, repeating steadily into the dark toward wherever the mystery ship might be listening. It said, in plain terms, that the Thren Ascendancy had noticed their visitor, respected the skill shown in every encounter so far, and wished, if the visitor's makers were willing, to speak honestly rather than continue a chase that benefited no one. Far out past the border, aboard the Restless, Ruth picked up the broadcast within hours of its first transmission and played it for Mara without comment, letting her hear the words for herself. Mara sat in silence for a long moment after it finished, staring out at the stars, turning the message over in her mind. Well, she said finally quietly, that's new. Mara did not answer the message right away. She sat with it for 2 full days, replaying the broadcast a dozen times, listening to the careful, measured tone of it, the way it had been worded to sound like an offer rather than a demand. Ruth had translated the core meaning within minutes of first hearing it, but Mara kept coming back to certain phrases, turning them over in her mind like stones. They respect the skill shown in every encounter, she said aloud, more to herself than to Ruth, on the second evening. That's a strange thing for an empire to say to something they can't even properly see. It could be a trick, Ruth said, a way to lower our guard before another attempt at capture. It could be, Mara agreed, or it could be exactly what it sounds like. An empire smart enough to know that chasing us forever isn't working, and decent enough to try something else instead. She rubbed her eyes, tired in the particular way that came from thinking too hard about a decision with no easy answer. Fleet Command needs to know about this either way. That's not my call to make alone. She spent the better part of a full day composing a careful report, laying out everything that had happened since the ambush, including the full text of the Thren broadcast, and sent it back the long way, through the relay buoys, toward Frontier Fleet Command on Earth. It would take weeks for the message to arrive, and weeks more for any reply to reach her out here. In the meantime, she had a decision of her own to make about what to do next. We could simply continue the survey and ignore the message entirely, Ruth offered. That is the safest option, statistically. It is, Mara said, but it's not the only option, and I don't think it's the right one. She looked out at the stars for a long moment, thinking of every quiet, careful report she had sent home over 3 years, every empire mapped from a comfortable, invisible distance, never once making real contact with anyone. We've spent 3 years being ghosts, Ruth, watching everyone, letting no one watch us back. That's kept us safe. But it's also kept us alone out here, and I'm starting to think that's not sustainable forever, not for us, and not for Fleet Command's long-term plans either. Sooner or later, humanity is going to have to actually meet someone. Might as well be an empire that's shown this much restraint and this much patience. You are considering responding, Ruth said. It was not quite a question. I'm considering it, Mara admitted. Not yet. Let's finish mapping this section of the border first, the way we planned. Give Fleet Command time to weigh in before I do anything that can't be undone. But I want you to start drafting a response, just in case. Something careful. Something that doesn't give away more than we're ready to share, but doesn't slam the door shut either. Back within the Ascendancy, the broadcast played on a steady loop for over 3 weeks with no response. And slowly, the mood in High Marshal Droz's office shifted from cautious hope to something closer to resigned patience. Fleet Admiral Korath, never entirely convinced the message had been wise in the first place, grew increasingly restless. Marshal, 3 weeks of silence. Perhaps this was never going to work. Perhaps whatever is out there does not wish to be found, regardless of how politely we ask. Or perhaps, Ilsa Farron said quietly from her seat near the window, 3 weeks is nothing at all to a species patient enough to build a ship specifically designed to never be caught for years, possibly decades, without revealing itself even once. We are asking them to abandon a strategy that has clearly served them well for a very long time. I would not expect a quick answer. Droz, standing at his usual place by the window, said nothing for a long moment, watching the traffic move below in its familiar, practiced order. Continue the broadcast, he said finally, and continue reinforcing the border quietly as planned. Whatever they decide, we will be ready either way. It was during this uneasy stretch of waiting that the situation nearly slipped out of anyone's careful control entirely. A young, ambitious fleet commander named Haven Trask, stationed at a smaller outpost 2 systems from Velkar Reach, had grown increasingly frustrated watching his more senior colleagues fail, one after another, to catch the mystery ship. Trask believed privately that the failures so far had all come from the same mistake, trying to be too clever, too careful, too respectful of a target that in his mind was still just a ship, still bound by the same basic physical limits as any other vessel, whatever strange tricks its drive could perform. When new sensor data suggested the mystery ship had drifted into a system near his own outpost, quietly continuing its survey work exactly as Mara had planned, Trask saw an opportunity he was not willing to let pass to another commander. Without waiting for full authorization from Sector Command, he scrambled every ship under his authority, 6 in total, and moved to intercept, believing that overwhelming numbers, applied fast enough and aggressively enough, might succeed where careful formations had failed. Mara felt the difference immediately. Multiple contacts, Captain, Ruth reported, an edge of real alarm in her voice now. 6 ships. Closing at high speed, in a much more aggressive pattern than we have seen before. They are not attempting to box us in carefully. They appear to be converging directly, with weapons already active. 6, Mara repeated, her pulse quickening as she studied the display. That's new. I would recommend immediate withdrawal, Captain. This does not match the cautious posture described in their broadcast. Agreed, get us out, Ruth. Fast lane, don't worry about subtlety. The Restless folded space in a series of rapid jumps, pulling clear of the closing formation with room to spare, the 6 aggressive ships falling steadily behind on her rear display. But Trask, watching his own sensors with mounting frustration as his prize slipped away yet again, made a choice that would very nearly undo everything the careful broadcast had been meant to build. Open fire, he ordered. Full spread, predictive targeting on its likely jump corridor. If we can't catch it, we damage it enough to slow it down. It was, by any measure, a reckless order, well outside the restrained posture High Marshal Droz had commanded across the entire border. But orders given in the heat of a chase do not always wait for calm reflection, and 6 Thren ships opened fire at once, filling the space ahead of the Restless's predicted path with a wide spread of energy fire. Captain, Ruth's voice sharpened into something close to true urgency. Weapons fire directly along our projected jump corridor. I did not anticipate this response. Mara's hands moved on pure instinct, honed by 3 years of careful, dangerous work at the edge of powerful strangers. She threw the ship into a jump not along the predicted corridor, but sideways, an unplanned, imperfect burn that cost precious fuel and strained the drive system harder than she liked, cutting directly across the spread of incoming fire rather than through it. For one terrible half-second, as the ship shuddered through the jump, Mara genuinely believed they were about to be hit. They were not. The jump carried them clear, just barely, close enough that Ruth later confirmed a single stray shot had passed within less than 200 meters of their hull, close enough that the ship's proximity alarms had triggered for the first time in the entire mission. Report, Mara said, breathing hard, once the immediate danger had passed and the 6 aggressive ships had fallen well behind, unable to match the improvised maneuver. No damage, Captain, but that was... Ruth paused, an unusual hesitation in her voice. That was very close, closer than any margin I would consider acceptable going forward. Mara sat in silence for a long moment, adrenaline slowly fading, replaced by a colder, more focused kind of anger. They broadcast a message about wanting to talk, Ruth, about respect and patience, and then someone out here decides to open fire the second they think they might lose their prize. It is possible this action was not sanctioned by the same leadership that authorized the broadcast, Ruth offered carefully. Large organizations do not always act with a single, unified will, even under clear command structures. Maybe, Mara said, but Fleet Command needs to know both things happened, the broadcast and this. I'm not walking into an open meeting with people who might shoot first depending on which officer happens to be having a bad day. High Marshal Droz learned of Trask's unauthorized attack within hours, and his response was immediate and severe. Trask was relieved of his command before the day was over, his 6 ships recalled and reassigned. A formal reprimand entered into his permanent record along with a note, in Droz's own hand, stating plainly that reckless aggression against an unidentified and clearly capable power was not courage, but a dangerous failure of judgment that could have cost the entire ascendancy dearly. I gave clear orders, Droz said to Korath, his voice tight with barely controlled anger, standing once more at his window as evening fell over the capital. Restraint, caution, no offensive posture without direct authorization, and in a single afternoon, one impatient officer may have undone every careful step we have taken these past weeks. Marshal, this could be the moment they decide we cannot be trusted, Korath said grimly. If they were ever inclined to answer that broadcast honestly, this may have ended that possibility entirely. Droz said nothing for a long moment, his silver eyes fixed on the darkening sky beyond the capital's towers, and for the first time since the whole strange affair had begun, he felt something close to true fear, not of the mystery ship itself, but of what his own empire's impatience might have cost them. "Draft a second broadcast," he said finally, quietly. "An apology, Korath, a clear, honest acknowledgement that the attack was unauthorized, and a formal statement that the officer responsible has already been removed from command. I will not pretend this did not happen. I would rather they know the truth, including our mistakes, than assume the worst and vanish forever." The second broadcast went out within a day, carrying a very different tone than the first, an open admission of fault rare enough in ascendancy diplomatic history that several of Droz's own advisors privately worried it made the empire look weak. Droz did not care. He had begun to believe, in the quiet hours since Trask's reckless attack, that whatever was out there watching them deserved more honesty than pride, and that the cost of losing this fragile, uncertain chance at real contact would be far higher than the cost of admitting a mistake. Aboard the Restless, Mara received the second broadcast 3 days after the first, and read through Ruth's translation of it slowly, twice, before setting it aside and staring out at the stars for a long, thoughtful while. "They didn't have to admit that," she said finally. "They could have said nothing. Let it fade into the noise of everything else that's happened out here." "They chose transparency instead," Ruth agreed. "That is, statistically, an unusual choice for a species we have observed valuing strength and order as highly as the ascendancy appears to." Mara thought of High Marshal Droz, a man she had never seen, never spoken to, knew only through fragments of broadcasts, and the careful, patient way his empire had responded to every impossible thing her ship had shown them. She thought of the careful formations, the improved sensors, the honest apology sent out into the dark on the slim chance that whoever was listening might actually hear it and believe it. "Ruth," she said quietly, "pull up that response you've been drafting. I think it's time we finished it." They worked on it together over the following 2 days, Mara speaking her thoughts aloud while Ruth shaped them into something clear and careful, stripped of anything that might reveal too much too soon, but honest in the ways that mattered most. It was not an easy thing to write. Every sentence had to be weighed twice, once for what it said, and once for what it might accidentally reveal about Earth, about the frontier fleet, about the long, careful strategy of quiet observation that had kept humanity safe for years, while it slowly learned the shape of the wider galaxy around it. "We cannot give them a location," Mara said, packing the narrow length of the cockpit as she thought it through. "Not yet, maybe not for a long time, but we can tell them we exist. We can tell them we heard both broadcasts, the offer and the apology, and that the apology mattered." "That is a reasonable balance," Ruth said. "Though I would remind you, Captain, that any response at all will confirm to them that their message was received and understood by an intelligence capable of parsing their language, which is itself a meaningful piece of information." "I know, I've thought about that." Mara stopped packing and looked out at the stars, the same quiet dark she had spent 3 years learning to trust more than almost anything else in her life. "But information has to start flowing somewhere, Ruth, or we're never anything more than ghosts to everyone we meet. That's not a life, not for us, and not for whoever comes after us out here." While Mara and Ruth worked on their careful reply, back within the Ascendancy, a different kind of reckoning was taking place. Haven Trask, stripped of his command and reassigned to a minor administrative post on a quiet inner world, sat alone in his new, smaller office and read the formal reprimand a dozen times, each reading sharpening his bitterness a little further. He did not believe he had done anything truly wrong. In his mind, he had simply acted with the decisiveness that generations of Thren commanders before him had been praised for, the same boldness that had built the Ascendancy in the first place. Back when the first explorers pushed out into an unknown galaxy and claimed what they found rather than waiting politely to be invited. He was not alone in that view. Word of his reprimand spread through certain corners of the officer corps, and while many agreed with Droz's judgment, a smaller, quieter faction began to grumble that the High Marshal had grown too cautious in his old age, too willing to apologize to a species that had, after all, trespassed deep into ascendancy territory to spy on a military shipyard. It was a small faction, not powerful enough to change policy on its own, but it was there, a thread of resentment that would not simply vanish because Droz wished it to. Ilsa Farron heard some of these murmurs during a visit to Sector Command, and brought her concerns directly to Droz's office upon her return, finding the High Marshal exactly where she expected, standing at his window in the fading evening light. "Marshal, I do not wish to overstate the danger, but there is a faction, small for now, that believes your response to Trask was too soft and your broadcasts too accommodating. If that faction grows, and if the mystery ship's makers ever do reveal themselves, I worry we may not present a single, unified voice to them." Droz turned from the window, his expression tired but not surprised. There is always such a faction, Farron, in any empire large enough to hold more than one opinion. 900 years of strength and order does not vanish overnight simply because I ask my people to consider patience over pride. I do not expect unanimous agreement. I expect, and I will enforce, unified action, regardless of what any officer privately believes about the wisdom of it. And if Trask or others who share his view act again without authorization, then they will be removed as he was, Droz said simply. I built my career on discipline, Farron, long before I built it on caution. I do not intend to abandon either now when it matters most. He looked back out at the darkening sky. We are being watched by something patient, careful, and so far restrained, despite every provocation we have accidentally offered it. I will not let a handful of impatient officers convince that patience it was wasted on us. 9 days after the second broadcast, a faint, careful signal reached Velkar Reach, weaker than any transmission the station's sensors had ever properly resolved, buried in a wide spread of frequencies that took the station's communication officers nearly 2 hours to fully untangle and translate. When the message was finally pieced together, Station Commander Voss Ilarion read it standing at the same sensor deck where this entire strange affair had first begun, months earlier, and felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the station's climate systems. The message was short. It confirmed that the broadcast had been received and understood. It acknowledged, briefly and without elaboration, that the apology regarding the unauthorized attack was noted and appreciated, and it closed with a single line that Voss read 3 times before he fully trusted his translation of it. "We are willing to speak further," it said, "when both sides are ready to do so honestly." Voss forwarded the message to Sector Command within minutes, and from there, it reached High Marshal Droz's desk before the night was through. He read it standing, as always, at his window, and for the first time in months, allowed himself something close to real relief. "They answered," he said quietly to Tallies, who had rushed in the moment the message arrived. "After everything, Tallies, they answered." "What happens now, Marshal?" Droz set the message down carefully, as if it were something fragile, something that could still be lost through carelessness. "Now," he said, "we prove to them that we meant every word of that apology, and we find out at last who has been watching us from the edge of everything we thought we understood." The weeks that followed the exchange of messages were, in their own quiet way, the tensest of the entire strange affair. Both sides now knew, without doubt, that the other was listening, understood, and was willing to continue talking. But willingness to talk was not the same as trust, and both High Marshal Droz and Mara Calloway understood, each in their own careful way, that the next steps would decide everything. Mara's reply, once finally sent, had been simple and direct, exactly as she and Ruth had shaped it. It confirmed that her makers were a species from far beyond the Ascendancy's charted space, that her mission had been one of observation rather than conquest, and that she, personally, had been the one to witness both the honesty of the Ascendancy's apology and the discipline shown in removing the officer responsible for the unauthorized attack. It proposed, cautiously, a single meeting at a location and under conditions to be negotiated carefully by both sides, far from any shipyard or sensitive military installation, where a proper conversation might finally begin. Droz received the proposal with a mixture of triumph and deep unease. Triumph, because it confirmed everything Ilsa Farron's research had suggested, that this was indeed a new and previously unknown species, one that had shown remarkable restraint despite every reasonable justification for hostility. Unease, because a meeting meant risk, meant exposing Ascendancy officials to an unknown power whose true capabilities remained, even now, only partially understood. "We do not know what they truly are," Korath said, during the tense council meeting called to discuss the proposal. "We do not know their numbers, their true strength, their home world, or their ultimate intentions. A meeting exposes us to all of that uncertainty at once." "It also exposes them to us," Ilsa pointed out. "They have agreed to meet in a location we choose, under conditions we help set. That is not the behavior of a power seeking to exploit a weakness, Admiral. That is the behavior of a power hopping as much as we are, that this can be resolved without conflict." Droz listened to the debate carry on for the better part of an hour before finally raising a hand for silence. "We will proceed," he said. "Carefully, with every reasonable precaution, but we will proceed. I did not send 2 broadcasts, admit our own mistakes, and wait these long weeks simply to abandon the effort now out of fear of the unknown. Korath, I want a full security plan for the meeting site. Minimal ships, no offensive posture, but full readiness in case this proves to be a deception after all. Farron, I want you present as well. If this truly is first contact with an entirely new species, I will not have it happen without our best scientific mind in the room." The location, once negotiated across several more careful, patient exchanges, was a quiet, empty system near the very edge of the Ascendancy's border, one with no shipyards, no significant population, nothing of strategic value to either side. Neutral ground as close to it as either side could arrange on short notice. Mara felt the weight of the coming meeting more than she expected to in the days leading up to it. She had spent 3 years alone out here, trained for observation, for careful distance, for the particular skill of never truly being seen. The idea of stepping, however briefly, into the light, of letting an entire alien empire finally see the restless clearly, unhidden, felt strange in a way she had not fully prepared herself for. "Nervous, Captain?" Ruth asked, on the final evening before the scheduled meeting, as Mara ran a last set of diagnostics on the ship systems, more out of habit than real need. "A little," Mara admitted. 3 years of not being caught, and now I'm flying straight toward them on purpose." She managed a small, tired laugh. "Feels backwards." "For what it is worth, Captain, I have reviewed every recorded interaction we have had with the Ascendancy across these past months. Their conduct, on the whole, has been more careful and more honest than any of the 17 other powers we have observed during this survey mission. If any of them were going to be the first true contact, I believe this is not the worst possible choice." "High praise coming from you." "I am simply stating the data plainly, Captain." Mara smiled slightly, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. "Thank you, Ruth, for everything these past 3 years, I mean that." "You are welcome, Captain, though I would point out we are not finished yet." "No," Mara agreed, looking out at the quiet stars one last time before the meeting. "No, we're not." The meeting itself took place the following day, in the quiet emptiness of the negotiated system, under conditions both sides had agreed to with unusual care. A single Thren vessel, unarmed beyond basic defensive systems. Carrying High Marshal Droz himself alongside Ilsa Farron and a small honor guard, drifted at the agreed meeting point, sensors active but weapons deliberately powered down, exactly as promised. The Restless arrived exactly on schedule, and for the first time in the entire strange affair, made no attempt to hide, no scattering of its sensor signature, no careful concealment of its shape. It simply appeared, small and lean and gray, precisely where it said it would be, its hull now clearly visible to every scanner aboard the Thren vessel. Aboard the Thren ship, Ilsa Farron watched the readings resolve at last into a clean, clear picture and felt something close to wonder settle over her. "Marshal," she said quietly, "we finally have a full profile. Small vessel, minimal weapons, remarkably advanced propulsion and sensor scattering systems for its size. This was never built to fight an empire, Marshal. It was built to survive one alone, for however long the mission required." Droz studied the image on the main screen, the small gray ship sitting calm and steady against the stars, and felt the weight of 900 years of ascendancy history settle strangely on his shoulders. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he did not know exactly what to expect from the moment that was about to unfold. The first exchange of communication was slow, careful, built on translation software both sides had prepared in advance from the accumulated broadcasts of the previous weeks. Mara's voice, calm and steady despite the nerves she still felt underneath, came through the Thren ship speakers, translated into careful, formal Thren by systems Ilsa's team had built. "Hi, Marshal Droz. My name is Mara Calloway. I'm a scout for a fleet you have not yet heard of, from a world far beyond your charted space. I have watched your people for several months now, and I want to begin by saying that the discipline and honesty your empire has shown, especially after the unauthorized attack, is a large part of why I am here today, speaking with you directly instead of remaining hidden." Droz listened to the translation carefully before responding, choosing his own words with equal care. "Captain Calloway, I confess that for 900 years, my people believed we understood the shape of what was possible in this part of the galaxy. Your ship and your patience have taught us otherwise. I hope this meeting can be the beginning of understanding built on honesty, rather than the kind of chase that brought us here." "So do I," Mara said. "I won't pretend my people or my fleet's leadership know exactly what comes next any more than you do. First contact isn't something either of us has done before, not truly. But I can tell you this much. My mission was never to threaten your empire, never to gather intelligence for the purpose of striking at it. My people have learned, through hard experience I won't go into today, that meeting a stronger power carelessly can be dangerous for everyone involved. So we watch carefully from a distance, before we ever consider revealing ourselves. You are the first empire in 3 years my fleet has chosen to reveal itself to." Ilsa Farron, listening closely, felt a small thrill of understanding settle into place. "Marshal," she said quietly, off the open channel, "that confirms the theory. They are not simply cautious by nature. They have specifically chosen restraint as a doctrine, likely shaped by some earlier, difficult experience with another power. That tells us a great deal about what kind of civilization we are truly speaking with." Droz nodded slightly, filing the thought away before returning his attention to the open channel. "Then I am honored, Captain Calloway, that your fleet judged us worthy of that trust, however cautiously offered. I will not pretend my own people are without their doubts or their impatient officers." A faint, dry note entered his voice. "You have already met one of them." Mara allowed herself a small, genuine laugh at that, one that translated, imperfectly but clearly enough, across the channel. "I noticed. I respected how quickly you dealt with it, for what it's worth. An empire willing to discipline its own people for acting against a stated policy, even when that policy involves patience with an unknown power, is an empire I'm willing to keep talking to." The conversation continued for the better part of 2 hours, careful and measured, neither side revealing more than they judged wise, but both sides building slowly, the first real foundation of trust between two civilizations that had, until recently, existed entirely unaware of each other's presence in the same galaxy. Mara spoke, in careful, general terms, of Earth, of the frontier fleet, of the long, patient survey work that had brought her this far from home. Droz spoke in turn of the Ascendancy's long history, its 9 centuries of order and strength, and with a candor that surprised even Ilsa Farron, of the fear and uncertainty this whole affair had brought to his own careful, confident empire. "I will admit," Droz said, near the end of their conversation, "that these past months have unsettled me more than anything in my long career. An empire that has never truly been surprised does not handle surprise gracefully at first. I hope you will forgive us the rough edges of our response, Trask included." "There's nothing to forgive," Mara said. "You handled an impossible situation about as well as anyone could have. Better than most of the powers my fleet has scouted, honestly. That's not flattery, High Marshal. That's just the truth, and I think honesty is the only real foundation either of us can build on from here." As the meeting drew to its careful close, both sides agreeing to continue further, more detailed talks in the weeks ahead through channels still to be established, Droz found himself standing at the viewport of his own ship, looking out at the small, unassuming gray vessel that had, for months, outrun and outthought every effort his empire had made to catch it. 900 years, he said quietly to Ilsa, more to himself than to her. 900 years of believing we understood the edges of what was possible in this part of the galaxy, and it took one small, patient ship and one careful, tired woman from a world we had never heard of to show us how much larger the universe truly is. "Does that trouble you, Marshal?" Ilsa asked. Droz considered the question honestly, watching the restless drift slowly away from the meeting point, back toward the vast, quiet dark it had called home for 3 long years. "No," he said finally. "I think strangely it gives me hope. If a single scout from an unknown people can show this much patience, this much skill, and in the end this much honesty, then perhaps the wider galaxy holds more room for understanding than 900 years of careful order ever taught us to expect." Far beyond the meeting point, aboard the Restless, Mara Calloway leaned back in her pilot's seat, watching the lights of the Ascendancy fade slowly behind her, and let out a long, slow breath she felt she had been holding for months. "How did I do, Ruth?" "By every measure I can calculate, Captain, that went as well as first contact reasonably could. Fleet Command will want a full report, of course, as soon as we can reach a relay buoy." "Of course they will," Mara smiled, a real, tired, satisfied smile, the kind that came from 3 years of careful, lonely work finally paying off in a way she had barely dared to hope for. "Set a course back toward the buoy, Ruth. Let's go tell them we made a friend." "Setting course now, Captain." A brief pause, and then, in a tone almost warm enough to be called proud, Ruth added, "For what it is worth, Captain, in 3 years of watching you work, I believe this was your finest hour." Mara looked out at the stars one last time. At the Empire she had spent months evading, testing, and finally, carefully, trusting and felt, for the first time in a very long while, that the vast, lonely dark between the stars held a little more room for hope than she had ever quite allowed herself to believe. Weeks later, the full report finally reached Frontier Fleet Command back on Earth, carried through the long chain of relay buoys that stretched, quiet and patient, across the vast distance between home and the edge of known space. It landed on the desk of Fleet Admiral Renata Osai, a woman who had overseen the Frontier Fleet's careful scouting program since its earliest days, and who had read hundreds of reports from dozens of ships over the years, each one a small piece of the larger map humanity was slowly building of the galaxy around it. She read Mara's report twice, start to finish, lingering over the details of the ambush, the reckless attack, and the careful, honest apology that had followed it. When she finished, she sat back in her chair and allowed herself a rare, quiet smile. "Get me a channel to the science division," she said to her aide, "and pull every file we have on Frontier Fleet Scouts operating anywhere near the Thren Ascendancy's territory. If Captain Calloway is right, We may have just found the first real partner this fleet has ever made out there. I want to know everything about them before we decide what happens next." Her aide nodded and hurried off, and Osai turned to look out her own window, not at alien stars, but at the familiar blue sky of Earth, thinking of a small gray ship somewhere impossibly far away, still quietly, patiently doing the work it had been built for. Back at the edge of the Ascendancy, life along the outer reach slowly began to change in small, steady ways over the following months. Patrol schedules adjusted once more, this time not to hunt an unknown threat, but to prepare for the slow, careful work of building a real relationship with a species the Ascendancy was only beginning to understand. Commander Vas Ilarion, who had first spotted that faint, flickering signature so many months ago, found himself assigned to a new post entirely, helping coordinate the earliest stages of what officials in the capital were now carefully calling the Callaway Accord, named, at Droz's own quiet insistence, after the woman whose patience and skill had made the entire fragile peace possible. Sarnos, promoted not long after for his role in the earliest encounters, took a particular quiet pride in telling the story to younger officers whenever the occasion allowed, always ending it the same way. "I chased that ship for nearly an hour," he would say, "and never once caught more than a shadow of it. I have never been more grateful in my whole career to have failed at something so completely." High Marshal Droz himself, in the quiet hours he still spent standing at his office window, found that the view of the capital's traffic looked different to him now than it had before that first strange report arrived. Not smaller, exactly. Simply part of something larger than he had once believed possible, a galaxy with more room in it for patient, careful strangers than 900 years of confident history had ever prepared him to expect. And far out past the border, in the quiet, endless dark that had been her home for 3 long years, Mara Callaway guided the restless steadily onward, toward new borders, new mysteries, and new chances, however far off, for the kind of careful, honest first contact that had begun, against every reasonable expectation, with a single unknown vessel that nothing in an entire empire could catch.